religious, almost fanatics, but not fanatics, but very, very strong. And I'd really like to have a priest or two, or a nun or two from the family. Thank you. Was I had three women. My mother for 23 years, Lois for 14, and Dolores for 48. I'm in the post-woman stage now. But those were the way my life worked. And so if you wondered if this fits within that, that fits. My name is Samuel Donato. I have a middle initial or a middle name, but that really is a confirmation name. It's not a legal name, and it's Arthur. Samuel Arthur Donato, S-A-D for sad. And of course, I've never tried to be sad. I try to avoid sad things. When I was born on June the 3rd, 1929, 4 months before the, 4 months before the disaster. I was born at 119th Street and First Avenue in Manhattan, in an apartment house on the northeast corner of that corner. I grew up there for 2 years, and then moved to 120th Street into a private home, and then moved to 119th Street again, but down the block from where I was before. That neighborhood was the original Little Italy, was the northern part of Little Italy. And in that area, my grandparents lived, my uncle and aunt lived, 2 uncles and aunts lived, and of course my father, my mother, and my sister and brother, and myself lived. And we stayed in that area until we moved into the Bronx 5 years later. After I was born, my first recollection of anything is when I was 2 years old, at which point in time I was one of our 3 kids who had chicken pox. So my sister, my brother, and myself went through the chicken pox thing. My mother went through it as she was taking care of us, but the pressure was so great on her that she had a nervous breakdown. My grandmother, on my father's side, came, spent time with her, helped her through it all, and my mother ultimately was able to return to doing the things that she wanted to do and had to do on a daily basis. I was named after my godfather, whose name was Samuel Arthur Donato. My godfather was one of the nicest men. Between he and my father, they would be loved by everybody. My father was a little more quiet. Uncle Sam always had a joke, always had a song, whether it was a difficult time or a fun time, you could always depend on something pleasant coming out of his mouth. At one point in time, he was in an automobile accident. His legs were mangled. He was taken to the hospital. They figured he was going to be there for a month, and he knew that. So after the first week, he started to move around the wards with his wheelchair, singing songs, so that everybody would get, and he got them all involved. He was a very interesting guy. When I was about 4 years old, and I was living in an apartment on 119th Street, across the street from Holy Rosary Church. It was a beautiful church, and I loved that church. But Uncle Sam came to visit me while I had pleurisy. And you know, pleurisy is a very painful disease. It can go away by itself, but it generally needs some treatment. Well, Uncle Sam came walking in the door, looked at me, told me a joke. I started to laugh, and of course the pain was there. And he said, well, if you don't want, I won't tell you any more jokes. I started laughing even more. Well, Uncle Sam always was like that. As a little kid, I was very sick very often. And this time with the pleurisy, I still remember him coming. Let's talk about the immigration story. We had two grandparent groups coming over from Italy. The maternal grandparents and paternal grandparents. My father's parents and his brother and sister originally came over from Italy in the year 1905. My father was 4 years old at the time. He came over with my grandfather and grandmother and brother and sister, uh, primarily to make a new location because of freedom, uh, because they didn't feel the freedom in Italy that they felt they should have. Uh, my father and my grandfather went back to Italy uh, because my grandfather owned a farm, a chestnut farm in Italy, and his brother was running it while he was away, but he wanted to make sure that his brother knew what to do and was able to carry on after he came back to the United States. When my father and grandfather went back, my father learned how to learned how to play the trumpet. He did that extensively while he was there. They initially stayed there for approximately 4 years and then came back to the United States. When they came back to the United States, my grandfather opened up a vegetable stand on 116th Street and First Avenue because he knew that business. Because having had his own farm, he understood what needed to be done with the veggies. Uh, uh, he did that, but my grandmother and my uncle and my father and my aunt all went back to Italy because my grandmother had family there and she wanted to be with her family. And so they went back approximately 1909. They all returned in 1914, permanently. And when they returned, my father, who was now proficient with the trumpet, began working with the bands and did a lot of band work and music work. He also worked some part-time jobs, like with a printer and in the vegetable store. He began going on trips with the band, and they did most of the eastern part of the United States. They would do it in a car. The band leader owned the car. The band got in the car. My father was the navigator, and they went all over the place. He loved that. But when he came home, he was lovely. I didn't have my father every day of my life, but those days I had, they were 100%. Absolutely wonderful. Now my mother, on the other hand, came with two of her sisters in 1910. My mother was 2 years old. Her older sister was 4. Her younger sister was 1, and she came over with her mother and father. Her father was a gardener, landscaper. When they came, they went immediately to Connecticut, and they went to an estate. It was the Lockwood Matthews Estate, which is still up there, by the way, and now is a museum. He was the gardener for that whole group, and he did that for many, many years. And while there, my grandmother and grandfather had 7 more children. They ended up with 4 boys and 6 girls, one of whom passed away early. They came here because of jobs. They did not see any job possibilities for their lives in Italy. So they came here, never went back again, never had any inclination. And my mother used to say, she came here as a little kid, she bent down, kissed the ground, never went back again. My father's family came from an area called Avellino, which is in the southern portion of Italy, right behind Sorrento. They lived in that area for their whole lives, at the bottom of the mountain. My mother came from St. Agatha, which is a little bit more inland from Avellino, but nonetheless, it was the southern portion of Italy. So my mother and my father both came from that area. They didn't know each other at that point. They didn't know each other until they came here. And I will tell you that that was a unique way in which they got together. There were two ships involved. There were two ships that carried them over. The first one was called the Perugia. Perugia means rain, but that was the name of the ship, and it came out of Naples. It was owned by the Italian line, and that was the first ship that my grandfather and my father and his family came over on. That ship, they traveled reasonably well. They were not in steerage, probably because my grandfather had a farm, a chestnut farm, and was able to put some money away and be able to pay his way. My mother came over on the Rex. The Rex, her original, the only time she came, and the Rex was a very big ship, very well known in Italy, and throughout the United States as well, because it transported so many immigrants. When my mother came, they came, as she told me, in steerage. Steerage being the lowest level that you can get on a ship. As long as you're on the ship, though, you know you're going to get there, so that's what she was looking for. The last time that my mother and that my grandmother and the three kids came back from Italy, that was in the year 1914. They came on a ship called Teo, T-E-O, and that also was part of the Italian lines. All of this information came to me from some documents that my brother and sister had, which I had never seen before until we started talking about what went on with them. I've never heard any stories about Ellis Island, except that it was very well organized. Everything worked well. They came through. There was no antagonism, no threats, nothing like that. Everything was just very pleasant, and everything that they had imagined about the United States was shown when they came to Ellis Island as a very nice place to come.